We are going to share the screen here and show our little disclaimer for those new to the channel. This is beyond the fundamentals. If this is not where you're willing to go, and if you're not growth oriented, then this channel may not be appropriate for you at this time. And I think that shared the wrong screen. Try again, see if that works. And if it doesn't, oh well. There it goes. Sorry about that. We're having a little technical difficulties at the beginning of this. So what we're going to talk about today contains growth-oriented content. Non-growth oriented viewers may be triggered into defensiveness by their attachments, propositional beliefs by which they hold in having mode, thus provoking them to respond in fear, anger, resentment, and to accuse of all manner of heresy, liberalism, backsliding that would enable them to delay taking responsibility for their own growth and transformation. So viewer discretion is advised. Now, what we're going to do in this video is we're going to take a very small segment from a video. We're not going to play the video, but we have a very small segment from this video where John Vervaeke and Ian McGilchrist both very briefly described the meaning crisis. And the name of the video is Ian McGilchrist and John Vervaeke on God, Meaning, Consciousness, and Being. And the reason I wanted to take a very small portion like this and have this discussion was because the meaning crisis could be defined out in very long terms and it could be very confusing. So I'm like, well, if I just narrow it down to something simple, maybe this will be something that the audience can get, can grasp more easily. And in short, I want to try to summarize, the problem with the meaning crisis. The meaning crisis puts us in a situation. See, we're embedded in our culture. We're Christians, right? We're following Jesus Christ, but we are embedded in a culture which essentially impairs us and makes us less capable to discover truth or to pursue wisdom. So whenever we have something in our hand that, like the Bible, that says we can, hey, I've got truth right here. We know that propositionally, but we can't actually embody that truth or walk in its wisdom. And because we are so affected by a society that is in a meaning crisis, we wind up conforming to that meaning crisis and replicating it down in the church. So we have a meaning crisis version of the church. And from my perspective, solely my perspective, we have people in the church tend to exacerbate or cause anxiety and suffering to others to a higher degree than those outside the church, when we should be people offering relief from it. I don't know if you want to say something there, if you have any opinions on, like, how can we help grasp this from a Christian perspective?
Well, I think the first, or a good first place to start would be to at least kind of define, or at least set the parameters of what we mean by meaning or a meaning crisis. And that might help. And then that might help us also transliterate what that might mean for in a more Christian cultural cognitive grammar scheme. And so right off the bat, for me, where I'm at least in terms of my understanding, I tend to do a lot of my thinking by overlaying a concept that I'm trying to understand over or under or to the side of something that I might have a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of. And so, for example, I've been thinking about the notion of faith a little bit more tangibly, I guess you could say. And so this is over the course of, maybe a couple years. And so I've started to understand the notion of meaning in a very close proximal way as like the function of faith. So in my mind, sometimes I'll replace.
So faith is doing something. It's functioning.
Yes.
And that function results in meaning.
Something like that is
Okay.
how I'll play with it. And so like if I see something like the meaning crisis, what I'll automatically do is kind of insert the notion of my understanding of the function of faith or faith itself as a faith crisis. You see, a crisis of, you know, in a typical Christian lingo might be, oh, he's having a crisis of faith. And, you know, usually what's intending to be said there, what that's going to amount to is somebody's having some sort of kind of like, like moralistic guilt over the fact that they can't, that they're like, maybe their conscience can't assert a certain propositional belief or something like that anymore. Like Tyler Vela, for example. Like Tyler Vela had a crisis of faith in that he can no longer bring himself to espouse something like the hypostatic union of God, or, you know, the penal substitutionary atonement or something like that. And so that's considered a faith crisis. That's not how I understand faith, at least holistically. But to get back to sort of maybe a good place to start is to maybe sort of draw out what we mean by the notion of meaning. And so that we can understand what a crisis of meaning might actually entail, what it might look like. Then my first instinct is to overlay my understanding of faith. And so I would say that we're having like a faith crisis. You know, and like Fowler's stages of faith is going to play a big role in how I'm understanding the function of faith, and therefore how I'm understanding the notion that John Vervaeke and Ian McGilchrist are getting at by the meaning crisis.
Right. So, I mean, the word that jumps out to me with faith, because Fowler bases his on Tillich, which is your connectedness to that which is of ultimate concern. And it's that connectivity. So I think when Vervaeke's talking and when McGilchrist is talking, you have this emphasis on connectivity, the quality of the connectedness that you have with other entities translates directly. It's directly proportional to the meaning that you have in life.
Right. And so other words that are gonna serve us in this little scheme is something like, so connectedness. So the next word that you kind of come up with, well, what is a connection? Well, it's inherently a relationship, right?
Yes.
It's a betweenness. And so then you bring in kind of biblical language, and it's like, what is the thing that is the bond of perfection? And it's love.
Right.
And so
charity is the bond of perfection, right?
Exactly. So you're going to have notions of, now we're trying to piece together a little bit more of this puzzle so that we can speak about this thing in a meaningful way or an insightful way. And so when we talk about
when religio means a binding, a rebinding together, and when Jesus said my yoke is easy and my burden is light, maybe he's not talking about the burden when he says yoke, but the binding itself being charity. It'd be very interesting to think about.
Yeah. Like, so you see, when you start interacting with another person in this like deeper level space, if you're patient, a little bit slower with your thoughts, a little bit slower with your words, then you start to see how somehow these concepts are kind of connected, and it's like you already know they're connected, but you're struggling through trying to maybe like immerse or like express out what you understand in like your body and in your experience out through your words.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And so
Like you have a participatory experiential sense of this, but then it helps to have another person to bring it to the surface of proposition so we can exchange it as a currency between each other.
And so partially, I think if we stay focused on what we, at least in these initial stages of the dialogue, if we stay focused on what do we actually mean, or at least what do we understand as the meaning crisis, I think it's going to be something like, and I'll try to say something new, like something that I've never said before.
Okay.
It's going to be something like a threat to those functions which have always or are which serve to connect us to that which is real, or at least real in the term in terms of our experience.
A threat to those functions which serve to connect us to that which is real. Therefore,
which sounds like
we are, as the meaning crisis takes hold, we are less connected to that which is real.
Exactly.
I want to give an example of this. Like you and I think that you and I can connect as friends, as genuine people. Like you've been to my house before, we've hung out. We do not virtue signal in front of each other. That's all I'm going to say about that. But we don't put on airs. We don't pretend. We don't pretend we're any better. I think we know pretty much everything there is to know about each other. But if I were relating to you because, say, we're both Calvinists, or because we're both provisionists, or because we're both independent fundamental Baptist, dispensationalist, premillennial, fundamental, with the emphasis on the fun, the damn, or the mental, the kind of things that they say. So if we were relating because of our mutual affiliation with some ism like that, I wouldn't really be relating to you. I would be relating to the ism, and you would be filling in as a proxy for it, so long as you toe the line to what I demand that you virtue signal back to me. So in other words, what that means is while I would be exchanging words with another human being, I'm not really connected to them. I'm connected to an ideology, and I'm using them as a proxy to do that. And I'm not really interested in that person, because as soon as I see some of their flaws where the religiosity isn't properly virtue signaled back to me, and now I'm too good and holy to associate with them, then I break fellowship. I was never connected to you in the first place. I was connected to something else, an overlay of you. So the real you, reality, I cannot connect to if I am more committed to an ism, a set of beliefs, than I am to you, the person. And if you live your life that way, you wind up actually not connected to anybody, even though you interact with them.
So that makes me like, what I'm hearing is something like that the inauthenticity of trying to make connections based on using like a belief as like the template mechanism which relates you to other things. It's what it sounded
to
the
me,
mechanism
which relates you to other things. Right. So it's not you relating to other things. You have a mechanism doing it for you.
A template doing it for you. So what that sounds like is basically a synthetic remanufacturing machine that constantly produces the same relationship constantly over and over again. And the thing is that is so negligent, because every single thing that you interact with in actuality, or at least as far as I can tell, is so intensely combinatorially explosive, that it cannot be standardized. It
Right.
cannot be
Right.
standardized.
So
And
that
it is
narrows it down for
absolutely
somebody who doesn't want to put any effort into a real relationship. For somebody who doesn't want to endure the anxiety of staring another human being in the eyeballs and seeing their
Yes.
soul, they can
Yes.
instead narrow it down by this ideology.
Template. Right. I say a standardized, it's like a standard faith mechanism. Like the way I do my faith is I do my faithing and, and my meaning making is through a a a standardized process, but that only reiterates to me the same exact relationship constantly. So now you get these Christians who the only way that they know how to interact with other people is based on a mechanism of saved, unsaved.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So the first thing that they think about when they come into contact with a stranger is saved, unsaved.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the first step. And then there's, this is the list of questions I can ask to investigate whether or not this is a saved or unsaved person,
Mm-hmm.
all the while foregoing the more important questions, which is, am I speaking to an individual that is unique?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And the thing is that their body is set up in order to understand that this is a unique and specific autonomous individual. Right. That's like kind of like down in the very, very roots of what it means to be a quote unquote Westerner, is that you almost act you act with the presumption that everybody is an individual. That's kind of right down into the very roots of your Western heritage, if you will. And so I think that what we're coming across here, or at least what we're kind of looking at together, is the possibility that part of the exacerbation of the meaning crisis is the notion of how ideology in the form of belief systems short circuits, like maybe radically short circuits the very functions of faith, and meaning.
Yes. So your capacity to be connected to that which is of any concern to you, your capacity to be connected. This template, this overlay.
But I think that it's important to point out what you had said about what this kind of rubric or standardized interaction with other people, what it really does to the whole phenomenon is that it shrinks and kind of alleviates the responsibility that one has to deal with all of the combinatorial explosion that's
to do your own
on.
recursive relevance realization in your interaction with that person. I no longer have to perform any of those functions. I can just overlay this template ideology on them and filter them through that. When I was in college, I got my Bible degree from University of Mobile, and it has a Southern Baptist slant to it. Now, if you are independent Baptist, Southern Baptists are like liberals. They're flying off the edge of the earth and God hates them, or they hate God, something like that. So while I was there, I had been an enthusiast of Ruckman's stuff. And so I met this other guy there who was also an enthusiast of Ruckman's stuff, and we could speak the same language. And so it kind of felt like we had this camaraderie because we could say all the same stuff, and we believed all the same doctrines and and we never really connected. Like in reality, we felt like we connected, but we really both connected to Ruckman and had that in common, but we never connected to each other. I've never really connected to the real guy that was him. Yeah. And I think that happens to a lot of people. We start doing that on purpose.
So go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I kind of want to, so I wrote something out.
Yeah.
And as a little summary here. And I want to see if it's helpful to because I went through this exercise to try to read this earlier. I mean, to try to
Mhm.
write this out. So, and then we could look at some statements from Vervaeke and McGilchrist as well. But I'm going to tell you my redux from it. I'm going to share my screen. And when I do that, there should see a slide here. And I have a few things written here, like just randomly things that are components of the meaning crisis: meaning, connectedness, relations, transjectivity, perennial problems, processes, self-deception, self-destruction, wisdom, institutions, religion, science, university, transcendent reality, material reductionism, technology, nihilism, left hemisphere liability, dispositional knowing, practices, 4 kinds of knowing, the kind of Christianity that emerges from such an effective society. These are the kind of things that are passing through my head. And I wrote something, and then I divided what I wrote into 3 segments about religion and science, propositional tyranny in the left hemisphere of the brain, and then nihilism and suffering. So I'm going to read the paragraphs associated with each one of these real quick, and you can stop me if you need to stop me. But for religion and science, what I have is the perceived divide between science and spirituality has resulted in dysfunctional institutional systems. The scientific worldview has resulted in an overemphasis in propositional knowing at the expense of the other kinds of knowing: participatory, perspectival, procedural. This disproportionate emphasis has affected religious institutions, leaving both science and religion incapable of cultivating wisdom in their institutional forms. Religion historically failed to adapt to the dynamic environment and devolved into irrelevance and obsolescence. The scope of science, the scope of science necessarily excludes the reason for science, like why should truth be valued? Science can't tell you that, and is thus incapable of inquiry beyond its own scope. Science has become regarded as a body of conclusions rather than a self-correcting set of processes. Now, we've done the same thing in theology. Theology has become a set of conclusions rather than a set of self-correcting set of processes. And the compilation and presentation of those conclusions is employed in political strategy and tribalism more so than it is an earnest endeavor to put in order the facts of experience and reality.
Mhm.
That's what I have so far. You ready for me to go on to the next one? You got to say something there.
So I'm anticipating something right now.
Okay.
Think of Dialogos. I'm anticipating a maybe a useful overlay in terms of understanding what you're trying to say here in terms of religion and science, and that it's very simple. And it's in regard to why the faith crisis or the meaning crisis might be taking place is because of the confusion, and I have to use it in Vervaeke language, like with fusion. It's confusion instead of having it properly divided, like Second Timothy, right? So it's not a confusion, and that confusion is between the notion of meaning and the notion of like facts, right?
Yes. So we're not talking about semantic meaning.
No.
Yep.
We're talking about meaning that is very layered, very nuanced. There's a lot of, like I said, different layers to this notion of meaning, but it's a confusion of facts, facticity.
There you go.
Truth gets bunched into this, and meaning.
Truth and fact are confused for each other, and meaning and fact are confused for each other.
Exactly, and it's all in this one little ball that needs to be sort of articulated apart and cut and divided, and in order for us to maybe have a much more coherent understanding of how we're functioning. So we are not, this is to confuse it, we are not just functioning as analytical scientific beings. That's not how we function. So why are we putting so much stock into the scientific enterprise? Okay. And then the religious end of this would be the end, in your explanation, would be the end that's dealing with the religio, the connected, the meaningfulness of this experience. that we call life. And
Yeah.
so there's this massive confusion and improper understanding of the function of facticity and science and the function of how we're doing our meaning making, which would be traditionally known as religion.
Right.
So making that divide, meaning, facticity, religion, science.
So
And that
right.
there's a crisis there.
There is a crisis there, and it's a little more. It's not just religion versus science. Like Ian McGilchrist points out that even from a secular, even just a human as a sense maker, there are 4 different lines of inquiry whereby you can make sense of things, and one of them is science, one of them is reason, one of them is intuition, and one of them is imagination. Now, imagination might sound crazy, like you're just use your imagination. It's not like that. You have to be able to envision what might be and then prehend it and then work toward it. That sort of thing is like somebody who's building a bridge, for example. You have to be able to imagine what the final product looks like, and then start moving toward it. So that has to be there. I think I'm going to go on to the next. Yeah, I'm going to go on to the next one, which is propositional tyranny and the left hemisphere. That's the next paragraph of 3. So let me pop that up here. The overemphasis on propositional knowing from the last paragraph up here. The overemphasis on propositional knowing corresponds to the tendency to operate societies and communities from the perspective of the left hemisphere of the brain, which is suited toward apprehension, but not comprehension. Thus, I don't understand the Bible, but I can apprehend all of its propositional statements in some kind of systematic theology. That's what a Christian would do with that. And they get that from the world. Be not conformed to this world. They get that from a society in crisis. This produced people who are oriented toward apprehension and have confused it and preferred it above comprehension. This leaves people and communities with no sense of what is not comprehended, and this is a huge blind spot in life. They don't know what they don't understand. They have no idea of like higher ignorance. These people constantly add quantities of data to their knowledge inventory while never transforming into the type of individual that can increase in qualitative comprehension. Or as the Apostle Paul puts it, they're ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. This leaves religious people with mountains of pretend Dungeons and Dragons information and supposed life wisdom, but with debilitating nihilism. They believe things that make them feel virtuous and righteous while simultaneously making them ineffective in the world. Systems designed for apprehension, like if your church is designed for apprehension, or the bureaucracy in your town is designed for apprehension, or a university system, systems designed for apprehension cannot cultivate wisdom. People need an ecology of practices that qualitatively transforms them into one who can both walk in wisdom while also continuing to cultivate it.
There's an insanely important distinction being made in these really good bullet points and paragraphs, and it feels like that distinction has to do with the difference between having something, like thinking that knowledge acquisition has to do with having something. Right. So the apprehension word there, systems designs are basically not going to help you acquiesce to wisdom, because wisdom is not merely the acquisition of factoids.
Correct.
And wisdom has something more to do with a comprehension. With I have to use Whiteheadian language there, which is difficult for
well, it's in the word.
But it has, so
it's almost like a transjectivity. Comprehension is a transjectivity between you and the future.
Right.
Because if you can comprehend something, then you can make predictions on it.
Yes, not factual predictions,
Right.
bodily predictions, movement predictions, speech predictions,
Right.
decision
Procedural,
making.
perspectival, participatory.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Not just factual predictions.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like merely semantic and factual predictions about what the weather is going to be tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? That's not what we're
Yeah.
talking about.
So you're bringing up
And
this having thing. I do have. I didn't put this in the little 3 that I was going to share with you, but the domains of inquiry that we would look into to try to fix some of these things. One of them is modal awareness. Am I
yes,
in having mode, or am I in doing, being, and becoming mode? And Seraphim said something about that. Meaning points to being, and that is a huge part as well. I didn't mean to disrupt you, but
yeah, no, I was just trying to highlight or extract out a little bit more what I was getting from your rendition there, which I saw you making, in maybe intentionally, maybe not, a very clear distinction between a mode of oriented towards apprehension, which would be the having
Yes.
mode,
yes,
and a distinction between an orientation towards comprehension, which would be a being mode, which will, if properly worked through, will help cultivate and produce more of what we would call wisdom. More
right.
wise people.
There's a predictive action with comprehension that results in further well-being. And the way that I envision this to help me understand it is if I have my wife, right, I may not understand or comprehend her. And so if I just have her, I just need her to shut up and do what she's told. Right.
Yeah.
Fill in, be an interchangeable part, or I'll swap you out for another wife. I see her categorically instead of charitably. But if I comprehend her, I can interact in a meaningful way that results in decreased anxiety and suffering for both of us, which
Could
you
you stay
can't
on
do
that?
that in having mode.
Could you stay on that for a little bit longer? Because I feel like it draws home for a lot more people when you're able to make an like that actual example of the difference between a having mode and a being mode. I think when you explain it in terms of having another person
Right.
versus let's say being with another person, those are so two radically different things. But I think that we just so take it for granted so much. I cannot tell you how many times I've been into conversation with a friend or somebody that I have a long-standing relationship with, and I just hear the word have come out
Right.
so I mean, so deeply unwittingly,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
And it's not to say that, again, it's not to say that we're against propositional knowing, we're against saying the word have, but it was so helpful to me, so deeply helpful to me, the first time that I had a mentor or an instructor tell me, pay attention to your language. Notice when you're saying a word like just, or you're using a pronoun like they. Because, like, so for example, you ever have somebody say to you, in regard to the Democratic Party or something like that, well, they just want to do this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, who's they?
Or yeah,
Ready?
or like at the job, someone will just say something like, they never let us out early, or something like that.
Who's
I don't know. Yeah, who's
exactly.
the they here?
Who's they? And so part of rekindling, let's bring this back to our first segment. Part of rekindling the crisis of meaning making and faith making, and remending that separation of being able to notice the difference between meaning and facts or events in the world
Right.
has to how do you represent most profoundly, no, maybe not most profoundly, but most typically, the things that are meaningful to you, words and your language. That's how you represent and express a lot of the time what's meaningful to you, because it helps direct your attention. It helps other people understand what your focus is on. And so we do a lot of our meaning making, or at least represent a lot of our meaning making, based on the language that we use. And we use our language in such a meaningless way.
That's right.
Because we don't know what we're talking about. We're not paying attention.
And it cheapens the language. Just like currency. It causes the need for inflation.
Which is going to segue us right into the next section of.
And then it's a lot more data compression when we do talk.
Exactly. And so if you can just get part of like at least in my opinion, and I'm by no means like an authoritative or professional opinion on any of this, but part of what I sense and what I think could help rehabilitate the severing of which is meaningful to to reality, is to start paying attention to what you're saying and really, really start to understand what you mean. So if you have somebody there, like an inner Socrates, or an inner Paul, or an inner Christ, like an inner self, that can help reflexively kind of whisper to you when you say something like, they never let us out of work on time. If that person could say to you, who's they?
Right.
And then you say to yourself, like you start to think, it's like, I don't know who they is. And then that person says to you, that inner self or that inner whomever, what do you mean? What, like, say it again. What do you mean? Like, you'll find like somebody who is in like a state of anxiety or something like that, or depression, or maybe exemplifying the meaning crisis. I'm not good at anything.
Yeah, they catastrophize.
What do you mean, anything? You got up today and went to work successfully. You're here engaged in this conversation successfully. What do you mean you're not good at anything? What do you mean, anything? So it's like, I know it can sound like annoying, but to get someone to slow down and actually value the words that come out of their mouth more meaningfully, might help. It might help ameliorate some of the kind of like the flippantness that we treat our own language with. And
So I think we have an example of this right here in the chat. Now I'm going to pick on Jamie in the chat, and first I'm going to say thanks for the super chat. He gave a little super chat with a salt shaker, and he asked this question: beyond the fundamentals, what is being missed in what the New Testament Bible that has been missed, or what's in the New Testament or the Bible that has been missed? If Christianity is God's purpose for the world, what have we missed? That's a fair enough question, and you can't answer that in this video per se, but then in the next question where he's reiterating it, here's an example of what you're talking about. What did we miss in the teaching of the New Testament? Now, he's making an assumption. There's a built-in premise there that the New Testament is a teaching. And we have this Western idea, this question, the way this is worded is indicative of the meaning crisis affecting Jamie's mind, because he is thinking that the Bible is a theological answer book that's pointing to a series of conclusions whereby we can compile a bunch of facts and then claim to have the truth. That's not what the Bible was intended to be for. The Bible is supposed to provoke doing, being, and becoming a more wise version of yourself than you are now. And so the meaning crisis, as it has come down probably since the Enlightenment, maybe before that, and a lot of factors, has caused us to see such things as the Bible, to be propositionally oriented to it rather than dispositionally oriented to it. And I like the way, that's the way Ian McGilchrist words it. So John Vervaeke takes four different kinds of knowing, and he's got, propositional, but then he has procedural, perspectival, and participatory. Well, Ian McGilchrist wraps all three of those up into dispositional knowing. And I like that because it's a little simpler, but the 4 Ps is still very helpful as well. And so if you have centuries and centuries worth of history, presuming that we think the Bible is teaching us things like facts that we can hold in a having mode rather than prompting us to be, then that's what we're looking for when we look in the Bible, and we're looking for the wrong thing. It has shaped our salience landscape, and when we do our recursive relevance realization, we miss the proper use of it. Yeah, it triggers me. I'm not upset with Jamie here, but it triggers me when I hear people talk about this is what the Bible teaches, or what's the teaching of the Bible on this topic. The Bible does not have any teachings in it.
Because you've built up a mechanism that has basically tried to understand what a person is trying to say or what they're really meaning or intending to say. And I keep saying this because I think it's so helpful, but the limits of our knowledge are made known to us, or can be made known to us, based on the language that we have access to individually, and that is also going to parameterize the very questions that we're even allowed to ask ourselves. And so the limits of our knowledge, like the parameters of our knowledge as an individual, is demonstrable based on the type and the specific questions that you will ask of a certain situation. You see what I'm saying?
Starting to sound like Forrest Landry here.
I'm trying. So it's been very helpful to me to, number one, pay attention, or at least I can't do it all the time. I just don't have it built up. I don't have the cognitive capacity to do that, or the maturity for that matter. But I try at least every so often to pay attention to what I'm saying, why I'm saying it, how I'm saying it, and have an inner dialogue with myself when I'm speaking to somebody. And then furthermore, I'm trying to be aware of the very questions that I'm asking in a given situation, because that exercise, that like spiritual exercise, will be the thing that will drive you and bring you face to face with all of your presumptions. You see what I'm saying? All the premises, all of the pre-notions that you have about something,
When you're asking these questions, you can also use it as a means whereby you can judge your apprehension and comprehension of that topic, domain, or environment. And then you can use that feedback to make a better grasp at the thing. And if it's so, like if you're mountain climbing, that you think that I can grab a pole of this rock up here, but it will give you feedback on whether or not you should have done that. And if it holds your weight, good. If it doesn't, bad. And then you have to readjust based on that feedback. So you're constantly going back and forth between comprehension and apprehension, and you're using these questions that you're asking the situation or the topic to assess how attuned you are to that environment.
That's a great analogy. The rock climbing thing works, man. Yeah, it's like your first grasp
Yes.
not to be confused with the apprehension, but maybe the apprehension is part of it.
Apprehension
Like,
is part of it. There
you know,
is a component of apprehension.
There's your first grasp at the next rock is miscalibrated, and your senses have to be exercised and attuned to know when it has missed the rock.
Yes. Yes.
Otherwise, you're going to fall. And then wisdom probably comes into play with somebody who has attuned themselves to very quickly and comprehensively recalibrating and grasping onto the rock. Their whole embodiment is very motion is quick, fluid, and now they have the rock, and now they can move on and do it again and do it again. So I think coming up with these little tricks, like pay attention to what you say, be specific with what you say, notice the questions that you're asking, how you're asking them, all of that stuff can help retether and almost reopen how you're experiencing and how you're connecting yourself to a situation, and thus reality, maybe hopefully retethering and ameliorating this thing we're calling the meaning crisis right now, and the faith crisis, as maybe we might try and transliterate it.
Yeah. I want to read this third paragraph, and then I want to actually, going back to the rock metaphor, I may confess a rock face groove that I cannot grasp. As an example. So the third paragraph that I wrote as a summary of what I think is a summary of the meaning crisis, which, by the way, is going to go on the About Us section of the revamped website, is as such. The third paragraph is nihilism and suffering. So we've already talked about religion and science, propositional tyranny, and left hemisphere of the brain. Now we're going into nihilism and suffering. This has resulted, all this stuff here that we just talked about in the last paragraph, has resulted in a nihilistic society. I can't do anything right. It's not worth it. In secular and religious domains, the religious people are worse off because their nihilism is masked by a faux but ineffective righteousness coupled with virtue signaling. Just as no good deed goes unpunished, the righteous deeds of the religious leave a wake of suffering which inflicts people for multiple generations, often long after the ineffective religious person has died peacefully in their sleep with the false perception that they are in the will of God. And then the idea here is that this ministry orients itself in faith toward the notion that this suffering and nihilism is avoidable and systemically reversible.
Yeah. That's so good, man. You definitely have to have this stuff published somewhere.
Well, this is going on the About Us. Like I wrote out the situation, trying to, when you look at an About Us link on a church website, you get the list of their beliefs. So This is going to be a situation, a vision and a mission, and then a what we should be doing about it kind of thing, more so than a list.
Very perspectival to me. It seems very like deeply perceptive and carefully considered.
So if I could just add one little comment on there, where I said, the religious people are worse off because their nihilism is masked by a faux but ineffective righteousness coupled with virtue signaling. If an atheist is having a difficult time, they are going to go to a therapist, and the therapist is going to teach them secular Buddhism, which is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And then the atheist is going to take that cognitive behavioral therapy back to their life, and they're going to start having a better life because of they sought help for it. The Christian is going to have the same problem, but then they are going to double down on their misapprehension of scripture to try to fix the problem, whereas their bad relationship with scripture and a false model of God is what created the problem to start with. So they are incapable of seeing the cause of their problem, and they're incapable of seeing a workable solution to the problem. And for that reason, I think they're a little worse off than some of our secular counterparts are, who can actually go get help that is based on experience with the world and things that are clinically tested and evaluated over time, rather than just a set of beliefs about how things should be moralistically.
Right. Yeah. Gosh, that's really well said. The chat has been like, that comment was weight, which I would agree with. Yeah. So in terms of what I'm hearing from you is something like your concern, and I've taken this, that I've taken this as fairly seriously with you.
Right.
Because I think that my personal opinion and observation is that you specifically have, as an individual, have a intensely meaningful and powerful responsibility. And I mean the responsibility technically, like the ability for you to respond to this particular thing is like no one I've seen before. Is a concern and a capacity to basically pull someone beyond the fundamentals, and specifically a quote unquote fundamentalist Christian. And I think that has served your salience landscape well. So when you're saying something like, I think that quote religious people have this added layer of morality or truthism in the form of the Bible, or this added layer,
or in their form or the perception of it.
Right. That this belief system or is the way or the answer to my current issues. That this is almost a worse situation to somebody who is kind of in open space, floating around with no ground.
So the added layer is an added layer of blindness.
It's an added layer of maybe of hardening.
An added boundary between them and well-being is their religiosity. Hence
why you're saying that not only can they not see the problem, but they also they don't have the resources available to them to solve the problem. And it's so ironic too, because the whole notion of Christianity in their rendition is about salvation or solvent, is to be repentant and to break free of said sin,
right?
The thing that is causing mortality and death and things like that, and I take that pretty seriously, or at least I'm observing that pretty seriously with you. And I think that in terms of I think that gives you a little bit of I don't want to say less tolerance, but like a little bit more of a visceral response when you see it with quote religious or Christian people, and it kind of softens you to say more secular people or atheists. And in my experience so far, which is not that much, but still some, I still see, even within these secular people who have not been religiousized to a degree, still a misapprehension misgrasping. It's just it's still there.
So I'm
I
wondering,
just
like,
don't think they have the arrogance which you're calling righteousness or faux righteousness, to think that they have some kind of answer which leaves them humble and open enough to actually seek a potential solution.
that's a difficulty right there, is that openness to something other than what they already think. Like
Right.
I can think back to myself when I was what I would describe as ideologically possessed. And I don't know what a person could have said. I don't know what it would take to just relate to me and get me to be open to something that wasn't in line with what I was currently thinking. I don't know what it would take, but in my life, I knew that it took crisis, very
Yeah.
serious crisis and suffering. So, like, I don't know how to I don't know if there's a version of, look, because I just got this comment from Seraphim over here. He says, I would suggest that your next phase should include and transcend the fundamentals that will bring you up to integral. And I'm thinking of like a rabid fundamentalist being a phase of necessary development for some people to grow past a certain thing. And that makes sense to me, but I'm wondering if it's possible to have that stage 2, stage 3 without the antagonism, without the rivalry, without the hate and the bitterness, the factionalism. I wonder if it's possible to have those stages of growth without I don't know. I wonder if right hemisphere operation can be integrated earlier in life rather than later. I don't know what I'm thinking, but that's where I really struggle. Like is it possible to have a non-combative stage 3 person who has some openness? Or should we just hold everybody down and put them on psychedelics to increase their openness? I'll tell you the rock that I can't grasp. If I'm climbing a rock and life is a rock and something that it is I don't know how to, like, there are certain people that showed up in the chat and I don't know how to say what I really think to them. I don't know if you remember when Kiss the Sun used to come on here. I don't know how to say what I really think without her using it for some kind of enmity. And I combine that when I'm not just using her as an example of this, but ideologically possessed people, like whether it's JD Martin or no matter who it is, it's people at that level. Like, I don't know how to talk to them about what I really think and have them genuinely listen. Like, I don't know how to do that. And then I couple that with, like, in my own life, I do not know how to relate to people with certain kinds of mental dispositions, including like cluster B personality disorders.
Yeah.
I do not have the skill set to do that. Despite my desire to have a connection with somebody who has a relationship to me, like a valid relationship, like a blood relative. But you just completely lack the skill set for how to nurture that relationship. Just have no idea how to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to grasp that rock. And I put some of these people and ideologically possessed people kind of in the same camp because they respond the exact same way.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to talk to them and tell them what I really think without them responding combatively.
So this is going to be the worst answer ever. But it just kind of, the whole time you were talking, I was thinking to myself, I don't know either. I don't know. I have zero idea. And then this light bulb that was like the smallest light bulb kind of went off. And so now I'm going to try and follow where that thought went. And it kind of, where it went was maybe a diagnostic answer, right? Not in any form like a solution, just a diagnostic answer is like, what if, like, the kind of people you were describing to me that I think you would say, you have learned certain skills and honed on certain skills, which have allowed you, it afforded you the capacity to cultivate meaningful relationships with things, people, and actually grow that. But that growth is also juxtaposed with this stagnant end of all of these, what you're calling ideologically possessed people. And like, part of why you might be even asking yourself the question of like, why or what is it that would basically open up the opportunity to make genuine relationship. Like, the little light bulb that went off, the little thought was something like, what if you're like terrified too? And the reason why I'm asking that is because I think I might be. And so it's a little bit of projection. But also the reason why I think I might be terrified to actually dig in to that question is because what I think resides inside of said people is the very essence of nihilism and emptiness and vanity. And that there is, like, I think I'm terrified to find out that there is actually nobody there. So I don't want to go any further. So I just kind of stay in this space of, well, I don't really know. Like, it's frustrating me that I don't know why these people are acting out in the way that they do. And the possibility is so huge and so infinite that I don't want to consider it. And that might all just be an excuse to the real fact that I'm like terrified to find out that there's a human being in front of me that is like really not there. Like, that would horrify me. It's like looking at a dead baby, for crying out loud, to me.
That's terrible.
Like, exactly. And that's kind of how I think I'm at least considering that it might make me feel, is that like, I don't have an answer to this because I don't want one. Because
I
I'm
think
suspicious.
there's a real boy in every Pinocchio that can be drawn out.
Resurrected.
Yeah. I mean, that's my hope. That's my hope. And I know, like, the thing that causes me to like kind of lose a little hope for some people is, like Fowler says, there are some people, many people, who will be stage 3 all their life.
Yeah.
I'm getting some complaints of some feedback. I don't know if there's a. You don't happen to have any headphones over there, do you?
Oh, I did. Let me hook these up.
I could put some on too. Then.
So, yeah, the fear thing, I think, is something for me.
How is that happening? Something's I'm hearing myself. I don't know if anybody's hearing a second version of me.
I'm hearing you clear.
I don't know where that's coming from. Oh, I know what it is. I know what it is. I know what's going on. I think I think oh. Apple's supposed to be smart. I think my wife might be in the other room listening. When I put my headphones in, I think it tries to connect to her device. Anyway, all right. So I'm gonna have to get some plug-in headphones. So yeah, that fear that nobody's there, nobody's home. I sense that, and I've actually started saying that to some people. Like somebody challenged me to a debate the other day, and it was a Calvinist, and what they did not realize was that we had already debated on Marlon Wilson's program, and he just didn't remember. And he's like, I challenge you to a debate. I'll shut you up so fast. And I'm like, well, I don't debate. Well, you too afraid to debate? Well, look, buddy, I'm not too afraid to debate because I debated you.
I'm too afraid to find out that you're not there.
You're not there. I have just repented of the immorality of debating. He's just
That
not
is
there.
so profound. And the fact that, so I just want, for anybody in the audience who didn't catch that, what you just said was that this guy said all this and had no recollection that he had already debated you, which means, because you know why, Kevin? Because he didn't.
Right, exactly. He didn't. And ideology did it through him. He was never there.
It's so scary.
And he wasn't. It's like a horror movie where you're trapped inside some robot and can't get out.
Thank you. See, so you see why it's like
in Superman 3 when the one chick gets caught, she gets turned into a robot lady and goes around zapping people. That's kind of what, if you're ideologically, or like a zombie, it's like there's no life there.
And that is a terrifying thing to me.
Awake thou that sleepest, arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. That's terrifying. Wow. That's the case, though. Somebody said last time Kevin debated a guy, he died.
So to take that one step further, one of the reasons why I think it might be a terrifying notion to try to connect with that which is dead or not there, the person in front of you that isn't there, the reason why that might be terrifying, if anybody needed any kind of explanation, is because you can't cultivate meaning with anything that is nihilistic or vain or dead.
That's right. You can't. And so you're engaged in a futile exercise. If I was having a discussion with somebody who was a real person but just disagreed with me, that'd be fine. But it's not them disagreeing with me.
Yeah.
At all.
It's 2 Timothy, profane and vain babblings.
That's exactly what it is. They're not there. Do we want to look at what Ian McGilchrist says?
Yeah, there's probably some meat there.
Yeah, let's start going through some of these statements here. Ian McGilchrist on the meaning crisis. He says, people have lost any sense that things really speak to them from somewhere beyond their own, what they've made up in their own minds. The experience of something great, possibly transcendent, certainly of existential importance, is harder now because we live in a world of reductive materialism in which everything is supposed to be explained as the dead movements of mechanical pieces. So this first statement up here, people have lost the sense that something really speaks to them from somewhere outside their own minds. That in his books, he points out that the left hemisphere makes a map. I should have parted my hair right in the middle. The left hemisphere makes a map of reality, and then whenever you look at reality, you actually don't see reality, you then see the map, right? So if you're reading the Bible and you're left hemispheric, instead of letting these things stand out to you afresh, like a literate 2-year-old would read them, you're reading something into it almost all the time. So if you go to church and you get caught something like this, you actually do not see the Bible, you see this instead. Remember when you used to pretend to be reading video game magazines, but you really had, some other kind of magazine on there instead. That's what people are doing when they read the Bible. They're really reading the systematic theology thing, and they think they're looking at scripture, but what the left hemisphere is projecting is that thing. And they cannot perceive anything outside of what their own mind has constructed.
That was such a vivid illustration.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
It was
So
good.
he continues to say, this is incredibly unhealthy and causes mental illness, which is not just my opinion, but the statistics speak for themselves. And I often, we had a guy Doug came on our FSI when we weren't live, and he was a therapist for 30 years and talked about the link between Calvinism and narcissism. And I don't think it's just Calvinism. I think it's any kind of ideological possession, whether you're a dispensationalism or a provisionist or whatever it is. That cluster B type thing is going to be associated with it, which makes me think that if wisdom can be cultivated, mental illness can probably also be cultivated. It's a huge mistake in its conception, because you think of wisdom as a reciprocal opening, and mental illness, if you just define it as a reciprocal narrowing, your inability to be agentic in the world, or a decreasing ability to be agentic in the world. It's a huge mistake in its conception, because I don't believe that meaning is something we make up. I believe it's something we find, and we have to put ourselves in the way of finding it. And that would mean putting a certain degree of vulnerability, of opening oneself to something in case one finds there's something there. And if one doesn't open oneself through it, one won't find that at all. Now, as soon as you start telling a Christian that some kind of responsibility falls on them for cultivating wisdom, they start to bug out on you. I don't know why it is people want an effortless Christianity. And there's all kinds of reasons to have an effortless Christianity, but that's what they want. And problem is, in order to walk in wisdom, it absolutely requires some degree of effort to find the meaning that's there. If you have a comment, stop me anytime. It applies to spiritual life, to religion, in as much as that is part of it, of many people, and it also applies to experiences of art and the experiences of another, and what it is to be a human being. We've degraded ourselves and then find ourselves in a nihilistic universe where nothing makes sense and nothing has meaning. And that's a very dangerous place to be for a number of reasons, and for the course of civilization, and also for each of us as individuals. And of course, they don't go into a lot of detail because this is just a summary thing, but that dangerous thing would be, if you double clicked on that, think about how dangerous it would be in a nihilistic place for your society, for your church, for your community, for your family, for your individuals. If everybody was waking up and saying, I'm no good at anything. So yes, it's a very important element in the position we find ourselves in. So there's that. Want me to go ahead, next slide?
I think the most important thing to point out from what you picked out from that one, that this little thing was, in terms of saying, like, Christians want a lazy Christianity or an easy Christianity. And what I see as a potential culprit, or more, just more to double click on what I think what you were saying, was that this is kind of specific, or at least more radical in Protestant Christianity, because you were saying they don't want to do they don't want to put any effort into such and such a thing. Like you said, if you said to a Christian, I would like to pursue and orient myself towards growth and the cultivation of wisdom. Like, when you step back and you think about those words, it's like, how could anybody ever find anything wrong with that? A person who could find something wrong with that is somebody who has a prefabricated critique system that hits
like
the red flag button on something that requires any kind of responsibility, personal responsibility. And that comes in the form in Protestant Christianity of the nascent Calvinistic notion of faith versus works. And so with
prefabricated critique system that hits the red flag button on anything that requires any kind of responsibility.
yes,
That's so well worded. That's so well worded.
And so, and I'm glad you could reiterate it because I couldn't remember.
Well, if I reiterate it now, I don't have to go back and listen to this again later.
in that thing that you just said, that I just said,
yeah.
That stems from the infantile or nascent form of the Calvinist distinction between faith and works. Okay.
Yeah, the Calvinist distinction, which is defunct.
And so the Protestant is at a disadvantage here because even whether or not they're a Calvinist, a provisionist is just as susceptible to this trap as a Calvinist, because they've made hyper relevant the distinction between faith and works. And so what this does is it puts them in a state of confusion about what is theirs to do. The second that you start distinguishing the notions of faith and works in the moralistic way that Protestants do, like you are a bad moral person who is under the law if you are putting effort or responsibility into
you talk
anything.
About effort at all. You're
not relying on the finished work of Christ at the cross. How utterly confusing is that?
Right.
And so then it puts them into this state with their eschatology.
So this is these moral boundaries on what you're allowed to think. And if you start to piece things together and connect the dots, there is a prefabricated line of reasoning which consigns you to immorality as soon as you open your mouth. So there is no sense making.
And it's all semantic confusion. It's like I heard so many preachers, Protestant preachers say constantly, "Oh, the world is confused. It's utter confusion. It's confusion everywhere." No. It's you conflating and fusing together notions, like in ambiguous notions of faith and works. When they say you're pursuing a works-based salvation or a works-based effort or enterprise, they're saying that you're trying to feed the flesh, you're trying to impress God like Cain. Or you're doing it under the law, and all the while they're saying this, they are creating another moral value structure that prizes this weird notion of faith and this very weird notion of what works are.
Right.
And ignoring the very simple notion of works that Paul is coming out in Romans. Okay. And so there's so much irony to this phenomenon as well, that it entraps the religious person into this unsolvable maze.
So if you talk about epistemics for two different reasons. There's the problem with Christianity is that instead of epistemics, epistemology, how we know what we know is true, instead of that genuinely being about discovery of facts and whatnot, morality comes into play.
Yes.
So instead of just being able to freely explore what does this book say and how does experience pan out with it, instead of being able to freely explore that, there's a long list of these little boundaries of things you're not allowed to say. cannot go beyond where the light touches,
Yes.
There's things
Yes.
you are not allowed to say because you're immoral for saying, not
Yes.
because you're stupid or you shouldn't investigate that, but because you're a heretic and you're not orthodox. So you're
Right.
not allowed to even inquire in that direction at all. And so people, and that's a lot of people don't realize when something that should be in an epistemic domain, like what does the text say, is framed morally. So you are morally pressured and morally conditioned not to conduct your investigation.
Yes. That's so precise. So precise.
And it's terrible.
Oh. And it's like, okay, fine. If I follow this whole moralistic confinement and entrapment of the personal endeavor to pursue meaning, responsibility, and purpose in my life, then you're left with complete and utter nihilism that makes you say, well, then what is mine to do?
Yeah.
If Christ has accomplished all things, and this is like the mantra that you're getting all the time, and then you're being discouraged every time that you start to generate any kind of worthwhile endeavor.
Right.
Then
right.
what's yours to do?
And there's so many different angles you could do, because as soon as you start to encounter, as soon as you deviate at all from the party line, if they run out of other things to say that are, that's works or whatever, they will then resort to, do you think that you're smarter than the centuries and centuries of good godly men who gave us all this theology over the centuries? You think you're smarter than them? Don't you think that if that was true, God would have revealed it to them and not to you? Like, they probably didn't say it because that was told to them too.
Right. So it just
smarter
goes
than Martin Luther. I don't know, probably.
It just brings you back to your third item of nihilism, and it really debilitates people, and short circuits their meaning making capacity.
So to hit on what I really think Paul is getting at, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this concept in the East called Wu Wei, and that is work that is not work. And the best example I can give you of it is like a plant. You cannot actually grow a plant if you're a gardener or a farmer or something. You can cultivate its growth. You can set the soil, you can set the water, you can do the tilling, plowing, all that stuff. You can cultivate its growth, but you cannot actually do the growing for the plant. And so I think what Paul is getting at when he's talking about not by works, of course, it's not the deeds of the law, but there is this concept of effort in order to press toward the mark, toward the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. There is this something that you need to be engaged in, some kind of ecology of practices that you do need to be doing, so that like you cultivate the growth of a tomato plant, even though you're not actually doing the growing, God gives the increase. You can cultivate that wisdom, and you cannot just sit around and read your Bible and go to church and think that you're cultivating that wisdom. There has to be a fairly serious, fairly intense ecology of practices, which we're going to get into on this channel, that can be combined together to help cultivate growth. All right. Let me see the next thing McGilchrist says. I'm see if we can get through all of McGilchrist and Vervaeke's comments, at least, because they're the ones that define this, and they're smarter than we are, and we'd be immoral heretics if we deviate from exactly how they've worded it. Gradually over the course, this is still McGilchrist. This is me bulletizing his comments. Gradually over the course of recent Western civilization, and particularly after the Enlightenment, we've overreached ourselves. We're not content with the idea that thinking rationally helped banish many unnecessary woes and mistakes and so on, but that we could actually understand everything. And so another way to word this would be people don't have an understanding of the concept of higher ignorance. You don't have a concept of how much you can't possibly know. Get a little itchy nose here. Once you think you can understand everything, your chances of understanding anything are remote. And that's the problem with systematic theology. It is undertaken in the thinking that I can exhaustively apprehend everything and I've got all the answers for you. Well, when you think you can do that, when you think it can be done, your chances of understanding any of it are remote. This has been taken to hubristic extremes during our lifetimes, and I associate this with the rise of a certain way of thinking about the world that I believe is the way in which the left hemisphere operates. It has evolved the way it has because it helps us grab stuff and get stuff, but it has outsourced the business of meaning and understanding to the right hemisphere, or to put it another way, the right hemisphere has outsourced grabbing and getting stuff to the left hemisphere and remained able to understand. So the right hemisphere understands, the left hemisphere doesn't. The right hemisphere can tell the left hemisphere to go do stuff like this, but then the left hemisphere, it prioritizes the theory over reality, the map over the terrain. And what would bring a different relationship between ourselves and the world? I indeed think this idea of relationship and encounters with reality is a very important one, which no doubt we'll come back to it, because this is the beginning of the video. I argue in my latest book, The Matter with Things, is in fact the relations are what everything is built out of, and that relations are even prior to relata. And I know people are going to say, what's relata? Relata is one of the objects between which a relation is said to hold. So if there's a relationship between a husband and wife, that husband and that wife are the relata. So if they're, if the two items are related, if a proton is related to an electron, the proton and the electron are the relata, and the relationship between them is the relation.
Right. So what he's saying there, just to double click, is that he's saying that the notion of relationality is more fundamental.
Yes, indeed.
Than the two objects.
Yes.
So you kind of got to just sit and think about that for a second. So for example, the relation, the letters A and B, they have a relationship, and that relationship is something like they're next to each other in the alphabet. Now you can zoom out of A and B and then put like the numbers 1 and 2 and understand that there's a relation between those.
A and B,
and then you can and then you can take the notion of A and B and 1 and 2 and zoom out of that and see that there is a notion of relationality that is higher. And what Ian McGilchrist is saying is that this notion of relationality, what Plato would call the eternal form of relationality, is more fundamental than all of this.
Right. So people may be very impressed with what a smartphone can do, but notice how it's shaped and notice what it has on it. It's got this touch screen here. Well, that's so you can relate to it. And until you relate to it, nothing happens in it or in you. So the relationship is why the thing is there. The relationship to you is why the thing exists. If that device could not relate to you, it would not have been invented.
Right. It would be irrelevant to you.
It'd be irrelevant to you. Right. So the relation, the relatability, the relational ability is more fundamental. Before we go to Vervaeke's next comment, I want to quickly talk about recursive relevance realization, because that's what he's referring to. And recursive relevance realization is the fact that one cannot pay attention to everything relevance selections must be made from that which is salient. Orientation helps select what is salient and relevant. Selecting a subset of available options is necessary for survival. The fact that we can only select a subset of reality means that we might leave out something important. What's important? That's the question. And I'm going to give a quick illustration of this. If you're driving down the road, there are two things that should be salient to you. One of them should be the direction that you need to go. Why are you on the road in the first place? You're probably headed somewhere, right? So you know which way you need to go. And then the other thing would be, don't hit, like you have a task. You're trying to accomplish two things. One of them is to get where I'm trying to go. The other thing to accomplish is don't get in a wreck. And there's all kinds of things that you could run into. You could run into a bee. You could run into a stop sign or a Mack truck. Now, some of those are going to be, if you had to choose, if you lost control of your car and you could either hit a squirrel or a Mack truck, and those are your two options, you would have to opt to hit the squirrel for obvious reasons. So, but the same things that make us adaptive, that make us notice the Mack truck and not hit it, are the same things that also you have to leave out everything else. As soon as I'm dodging the Mack truck, I may not realize that I'm also running into something else, you see? So the fact that you cannot pay attention to everything means that you have to cherry pick from reality, and you may cherry pick the wrong things. And if you are influenced by something that you should not be influenced by, you will pick the wrong things. And you will be disoriented, and you will have decreased meaning in life. So that relevance realization, it goes both ways. You can select things to make you more adaptive, and you can fail to select things that you should have, which would have allowed you to be more adaptive. That's so when Vervaeke talks about the processes, the very processes that make us intelligently adaptive, make us perennially susceptible to self-deception and self-destructive behavior.
It's also really important to point out with the recursive relevance realization schema is the realization part of it. So basically, that whole process that Kevin just explicated is basically, to say it in summation, is that what you find relevant is what will determine your reality. It's a realization, not realization as in like, oh, I discovered this. It's no realization in terms of this is what is the real thing for you.
For you,
it's not about subjective, objective realities or whether reality is subjective to that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what you zero in on and pay attention to is the thing that will determine what is real to you. And that's
your entire reality is shaped by, like, when you're driving, where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do what else you're trying to do, like not hit other cars. And so that shapes your reality.
And that's so helpful.
A zoologist at that moment.
It's so helpful to understand that in terms of biblical interpretation, like you did in the video the other day, is that what you find pertinent, what you find relevant, what you find salient, what foregrounds itself to you will determine your reality. It will determine what you find meaningful. And so that's why a Calvinist is a Calvinist, because they find certain things relevant.
Right.
So it would help a Calvinist to find something other than the preconditions that predict Calvinism,
right,
as a perspective to take and find something else real.
Yep. Yeah.
It would help break their Calvinism and see that their
what
Calvinism
is causing you to make those things salient.
Exactly.
As opposed to everything else. And that goes back to Jamie's question that was in the comments earlier, like, what are we missing in scripture? It's all there in scripture, just like all the things that you didn't do while you were driving on the road were still there for you to do, but you just weren't doing those things.
Exactly.
And they're just like the raccoons in the woods that you're driving by and never see.
Right.
The things you're just reading by a bunch of things that you never see and can't see because they're not salient to you. So Vervaeke says his rendition of the meaning crisis. We'll see if we can get this done in 19 minutes. The very processes that make us intelligently adaptive make us perennially susceptible to self-deception and destructive behavior. Across time and culture, people have come up with complex systems because this gesture, he's gesturing toward his head and brain. People have come up with complex system because this is a very complex system, pointing to his head, and ecologies of practices, I call them, for doing two things: intervening and ameliorating that self-deceptive and self-destructive behavior, and enhancing the sense of connectedness that is being undermined by the self-deceptive and self-destructive behavior to oneself, to other people, and to the world. That sense of connectedness, it overlaps very much with what's called meaning in life. We want to feel that we are connected to something that has value and a reality other than our own egocentric preferences in existence. I'll often ask people, what do you mean by meaning in life? And I'll say, well, tell me what you would want to continue existing even if you weren't here. And they'll tell me, and then I'll say, and they'll say, that's what matters to you. That's what you want. That's what you want to be. That's what you want to be connected to beyond your egocentric preferences and your egocentric existence. The capacity to ameliorate that self-deceptive, self-destructive foolishness and to enhance the sense of connectedness is what cultures have called wisdom. And I underlined that because the definition of wisdom is elusive.
Mm-hmm.
And to have somebody make a statement like this, it makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if you could make any sentence this short to be exhaustive of what wisdom is. Of course you could not, but this certainly would be included.
So, have you ever seen this documentary or this like little escapade that Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire has been on, where he goes around streets and he asks everybody in a like super sophisticated way, what is a woman? Right. Yeah. And he starts trying
I've seen a little bit of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not humorous to me. And it's actually kind of, it's distasteful to me.
It's like it's a little tedious.
Yeah. What he's doing is he's trying to get them to semantically define woman. And It's like the notion of woman is just like wisdom. It's elusive. You're not going to define a woman and encapsulate all of what woman means. Which is just, it's kind of a really wonderful thing to think about, that the notion
you're not
of
saying
woman,
that in a sexist kind of way. You're saying that kind of about a singular descriptive of any kind of being.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so it kind of gives me a little bit of joy to know that the notion of wisdom is elusive. It's very difficult. There is no grasping and having wisdom. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It will at the very attempt of making claim to having wisdom is almost the same thing as saying you're a fool. You know what I'm saying? How many times has somebody said to you, well, I'm a really wise person, which is exactly what the not wise person says.
Right.
You know? So it has this, the notion of wisdom also has these like really, catching the wise in their own craftiness kind of mechanisms to it, where it's like once you lay improper relationship or claim to it, it has this way of just elusively flipping itself and calling you a fool. And
Right,
that's what I
right.
think is meant in First Corinthians about the foolishness of God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it has the true wisdom of God has this way of elusively flipping itself and making anybody who puts themselves in improper relationship to it the very thing that
Don't want to be.
exactly. It's great.
Wow. That's
That
really well said.
and that's the same thing. That's the same like thing that John Vervaeke is kind of getting at with the same mechanisms that we have for cultivating meaning are the same mechanisms that can flip and invert themselves and make us self-deceptive and fools. So you see the whole notion of wisdom cultivation and meaning cultivation has this very, very carefully thought out. I'm assuming God thought it out. Way of defending itself against usurpers and people who would abuse it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's some people are in the comments section. I think they're misunderstanding what you're saying. Like, we don't know what a woman is. And it's not like that. Imagine if you have a statement of faith at your church, imagine writing up a statement of faith for your spouse. Imagine writing a compilation of an exhaustive compilation of all the correct things about your spouse. Imagine how that would go.
Mm-hmm.
It's a profane, futile exercise.
Yes, it is.
The next paragraph from John Vervaeke in his comments, he says, okay, we already read that one. What we're facing today is a two-pronged problem. People don't know where to go for wisdom. They overwhelmingly know where to go for information, but like T.S. Eliot said, we have lost the wisdom and the knowledge and the information, so they precisely lack the discernment as to what they should pay attention to. And that's a big thing that I underlined that. What do I pay attention to? There are 788,257 words in here. I cannot pay attention to all of them at the same time. Which one should I pay attention to now? That's a great question. And there are how many religious books? Which one should I pay attention to? There are how many other books? Which one should I pay attention to? There are 7 billion people. If you spent half a second looking at each one, you would die before you were finished. So what do you pay attention to? There's more things than what you can pay attention to. So somehow you have to decide what you're paying attention to, what they should take seriously, what really matters, so they're overwhelmed with information. What counts as knowledge is now significantly in question in our culture. And of course, when I ask people where they go for wisdom, I get either a deafening silence or I get some autodidactic religion of me that the person gives me typically. So the fastest growing group in the culture are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They have no official religious affiliation. That does not mean that they are overwhelmingly atheists. They are, by and large, they describe themselves by this phrase that is very popular to exactly the degree to which I find it vapid. They're spiritual, but not religious. And it's very hard to determine what that actually means, other than they have some intuitive sense that they should be seeking wisdom. They should be seeking connectedness, but they distrust any of the institutionalized sources. And that really stands out to me. That's Seraphim quoting James 3:17 down there. What was supposed to offer, so religions have been the home for these ecologies of practices, and the Enlightenment offered to free us from the tyranny of religion and give us an alternative home, and it gave us the scientific worldview, a scientific worldview which explains everything except how we generate science and the meaning that makes truth possible, and how science itself could possibly exist as a real entity within the ontology of that worldview. Now, if you want to double click on that, Jordan Peterson recently did a video on the origin of the COVID vaccine. and it was a discussion with somebody else, and right around the 117 mark and following, they really talk about this, how you can't do science without some kind of a priori ethic on which you do science.
That's
Where
right.
does that ethic come from? Does it come from science?
That's right. Yeah. Me personally, Whitehead is really kind of the place I go to sort of in a serious but also tongue-in-cheek way understand the notion of science can't explain science.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You're not going to uh you're not going to discover anything outside of science by doing science. So for me, with that sort of a conversation, I like residing with some of Whitehead's work, because he's a cosmologist in the early 19th or early 20th century,
Right.
who's trying to deal with the emergence of Einstein's general theory of relativity and a radical shift. And he's also dealing with the tail end of evolutionary theory.
Right.
And so he's kind of throwing up red flags and doing some good philosophy, if you ask me, where he's starting to discover and drill into the premises that certain institutions are holding, and he starts to really question his fellow academics and scientific colleagues on just what they think they're up to in terms of this process that they're calling the gateway to all truth.
Yeah.
And I think he does a good job of relaying his observations seriously, but also kind of tongue in cheek, because he's kind of witty about it. So it's kind of humorous in a way.
Yeah. 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 Whitehead's probably heavy reading for people, but I do recommend for those who have ears to hear.
Mhm.
The try to get these last couple in here real quick. John Vervaeke, continuing on the meaning crisis, he says, we in our science actually have no proper home in that worldview, and so the science can't provide a home for the ecology of practices. The religions are now largely regarded as obsolete and irrelevant for homing the ecology of practices, and so the perennial problems now go largely unabated or ameliorated at best by autodidactic systems that have strong proclivity for enhancing personal bias or group echo chambering. And of course, social media has just exacerbated both of these tendencies tremendously. And so we starve for meaning in the midst of a wisdom famine. We can't ignore a scientific worldview, but that worldview does not properly place us. What it does is it gives us a tremendous emphasis on propositional knowing at the expense of all the non-propositional kinds of knowing, procedural, perspectival, and participatory. So we live in a propositional tyranny that prevents us from accessing those ways of knowing that are properly the most powerful vehicles by which we can cultivate wisdom and a sense of connectedness. And that's exactly when the church has fallen right in line with that. They are following the world there in this propositional tyranny. So like that document that I sent you earlier, JD Martin did a post on Facebook, and I sent you what he wrote, and it's just absolutely profane. And
Yeah.
and he's trying to urge people to not be worldly, but he is perpetuating this worldliness in doing so.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
he can't even see it. He's too blind to see it. And he says, John Vervaeke continues, and I think that is the meaning crisis, and that's the situation we are in, and it's getting worse and worse. People experience it as a kind of domicide, like a loss of home, even though they have shelter, and COVID made it much, much worse. He says, we are seeing the mental health tsunami and the political ramifications of the acceleration of the meaning crisis right now. We've lost aletheia. That's the Greek word for truth. We've lost the sense of truth as what I call transjectivity, the deeper thing that binds subjectivity and objectivity together, the thing that is being given prominence by 4E cognitive science. And meaning is such a real transjective relation. It's not arbitrarily subjective. It's not merely objectively measurable. It's a proper, real relation. That's why we use the term connectedness. And so for those who are not familiar with the term transjective, it is transcending the distinction between subjective and objective, or referring to a property not of the subject or the environment, but a relatedness, a relatedness co-created between them. And that's so you see these same ideas reemerging, being worded different ways by these different people. Do you want to pause here and say something before we wrap up with another statement from McGilchrist?
I guess the one thing I would maybe want to point out was the JD Martin thing, where he's posting something and moralistically clamoring
he's
about
moralistically berating people for being worldly, while he himself is perpetuating
a particular worldview. And it's
a perennial problem, one of the world's perennial problems, because he's conformed to the world in that way.
Right. He's conformed to a world in that way, because it's using the word world loosely and ambiguously and non-specifically, because what he really means when he says the word world is basically people and culture outside of my narcissistic projection of Christianity.
Yes, that's exactly well worded. People and culture outside of my narcissistic projection of Christianity. That's so well worded.
That's what he means when he says the word world or worldly.
Yeah.
And that's not what the word world or worldly means.
Right.
You see, so it's hijacking. So he's hijacking, the ambiguity of that is latent inside of language itself in order to serve his own manipulations.
His own version. Yeah.
His attempt at
manipulation is a good word.
His own attempt at manipulation. And I'm using strong words here, and it's like, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable to kind of be calling somebody manipulative, but it's like he's being manipulative unwittingly. At least I hope he's being manipulative unwittingly.
Right.
And
I don't think he realizes it. And I wouldn't have called that out, but it was a public post, not within any kind of private group or anything. Which is
it also is, even if it is unwittingly, it still kind of needs to be needs to get some pushback. I don't want to puff up too much, but I don't really have a high tolerance for especially younger people kind of using and so-called like educated, in a theological way, educated people, that they'd be bludgeoning other people using
with
morality.
This concept, with this narcissistic projection of theirs.
I consider him a generational peer to an extent, and I think I'm okay using that kind of strong language, because it needs to get some pushback. I think I at least have a little bit of responsibility to push back on wrongdoing when I see it. And even if it is coming out of the mouth of somebody who has appropriated something like a religion or like appropriated the persona of a man of God, and it's like you need to have a finger put in your face, and no, that's not okay, because there's
Be ye
people
not
who
many
you're
masters. Yeah, knowing
yeah,
that you shall receive the greater condemnation.
there's people that he's responsible for that my heart goes out to them, because that's not cool, dude.
Yeah, it's not. And they're going to spend probably a decade and a half being blind to that and subjected to that, or more, maybe. I think I had some pretty serious wake-up calls when I was 22, and it stayed with me. I don't think I completely shed that until I was 39. And this kind of bigoted tyranny that he's got going on is going to have that same kind of effect on people, increasing the anxiety and suffering and exacerbating the problems. Let me hit up this last point here from Ian McGilchrist, last slide, because they came back to him for his description. And he said, we both see the importance of something that calls to us, talking about what him and John Vervaeke see. We feel ourselves attracted towards something, and we've lost the confidence to go there because technology and information have substituted for deep knowledge and wisdom. The dangers the technology problem, I lost my mouse, is the genie is out of the box and it can't be put back in unless you like EMP the whole world, but we still have the know-how to recreate it. One of the difficulties about it is it doesn't answer any questions, of course. All it does is enlarge our powers to alter things. And that's only as good as our wisdom about what needs altering and in what way and to what end. And I don't believe we have that wisdom at all. Daniel Schmachtenberger says it this way. He says, with technology, we have the power of gods, but we don't have the wisdom of gods to use that power.
Right.
And I don't believe we have that wisdom at all. He says, we have more power than we've ever had in history of humanity and the least wisdom we've ever had. This is what John was calling the rise of propositional knowledge, is very important when it comes back to look at things like belief in the nature of God or in the world. Notice he says belief in the nature of God, not in whether there is or isn't a God, but what is his nature? What model of God? When it comes to looking at things like the belief in the nature of God or the world, nature of the world, because I think they are dispositional forms of knowing, not propositional forms of knowing. And I kind of like that summary of, procedural, perspectival, and participatory knowing as dispositional forms of knowing. Unfortunately, in recent history, they've been presented to us as propositions that we either assent to or fail to assent to, whereas in fact, it's a matter of how we attend to the world, because attention is absolutely at the root of all this problem we see.
Yeah.
What should we attend to versus what we are attending to?
So, what's the language that is in Genesis when God instructs Adam to take care of, what is he? I'm just trying to get the exact language. To have dominion. He's to have dominion, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So another biblical notion that's coming to mind is dominion, a steward. 1 Corinthians 4 or 2 Corinthians 4.
Stewards,
Be
stewards
of stewards, right? These kinds of a servant.
It might be 1 Corinthians. Sorry, go ahead.
These kinds of notions, to have dominion, to be a steward, are all going to drive down to an agent who is paying attention to the right thing at the right time. A good steward is someone who pays attention to the right thing at the right time while the master is not present. That's what a steward is.
Yes.
He doesn't have the guidance of the laws of the master.
Right.
He has the responsibility.
You wouldn't want an irresponsible person or an unwise person being the steward of the king's harem while he's gone.
Exactly. A steward is that would be a cool dialogos, is like what is, the notion of a steward. And it's like the person, what is a steward? A steward is a person who pays attention to the right thing at the right time in the absence of the master.
Yes. So what I hear you saying, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, that's a really good point.
So we need to be better stewards of the world, not in the JD Martin sense. But hey, I could have added something to what JD Martin was saying by saying, you know what? I think what I'm hearing you say, sir, is that you want us to be better stewards of the world. And he'd probably agree with that.
Right. And paying attention to the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
I like that. So when Vervaeke is talking about recursive relevance realization, that to me, what I get from McGilchrist, the way he uses the word attention is the same thing. How do you select what you should attend to?
Yeah.
Now, what is relevant to you? What should stand out to you?
Yeah. And that's going to be determined by your agency and the arena that you find yourself in. That's what's going to sprout up the notion of relatability between agent and arena.
Yes.
The relation of agent and arena.
Yes. So, I mean, the thing that's bothering me most now, I think there's a guitar behind you that only has 22 frets on it.
Yeah.
Is that right? What are you doing with a guitar that only has 22 frets on it?
Well, actually, I don't know that. It's an Epiphone Les Paul.
Yeah.
I think it might have 24.
You think so?
I think so. I'll text you after.
You don't want to check? I'm looking at it. I can't see you on the other side of your shoulder.
Yeah, it's got 22. It's got 22.
I was real interested in Les Pauls, and then I realized that they stopped making. They only had like a few years where they made them with 24 frets, so you had to get them used to get 24 frets. Yeah, there's like a whole host of things that you can't play.
Well, I'm not going to be doing any kind of high noodling or anything like that.
Well,
I'm going to be playing down low. I'm going to be playing down low. No, I'm not going to be able to.
Yeah, you're limited. Your scope of your guitar science is limited by 2 frets.
Yeah, that guitar doesn't afford me all that much choice, does it?
No, it doesn't. It loves you 2 frets less worth of choice affordance.
Yeah, Shredhead and Roddy are saying 22. Yeah, it's okay. I'm not really a lead. I like playing down and playing in rhythm. That's where I like to be.
So I'm pretty close to getting I'm gonna start having music. It'll be cover stuff, but I'll be performing it. I'll start having music as bumper music for when we go live. So I'm working on that, pretty close to start recording, but I make so many mistakes that I can't record all in one, especially when it's difficult. I can't record all in one take. So yeah, that's how I want to do it. I want it to be real. I want it to be in one take. Anyway, anything you think we need to hit on about the meaning crisis before we wrap up for the evening?
I feel like this was a lot. This was a lot of content. This was a lot coming out. There was a lot of stuff that was said. A lot of things we hit on. I think it's going to take a person with some very, very, very keen ears to be able to hear and follow the thread or the through line of how things went. I felt a bit of a buzz in certain moments where we were able to say a thing that would not have been possible had not the other been present in the
Yes.
form that the other was present.
Yeah.
It's not just sitting there like drooling, it's like it's almost like in order for me to say the thing that can't be said, you have to this doesn't get talked about that much, but you have to be listening in a particular way.
Right. And you have to know that I am.
Exactly. And I have to know or sense that. Otherwise, I can't say it.
That's
It's
right.
just not
That's
going
right.
to happen.
Have to induce it out of you. So that's and I really appreciate you coming on, because this is such a important topic that I want people on this channel to be able to get, that I had faith that having this as a conversation with you would fill out that space a little better than if I tried to do this by myself. And I think that absolutely did happen. So I really appreciate you coming on and doing that, supplementing this with me.
Yeah, I mean, guess the last thing I'll say is just my personal circumstances have been have made it difficult for me to kind of sink my teeth into everything that's going on. And it's like I watch, the videos, and I find myself just having, what is it called? FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have that, and I'm kind of yearning for the day where I can just start sinking in and diving into all of the insights that kind of pop up whenever you're doing things individually. And because I do truly believe that there are things that I have to do that I'm kind of, I don't know, maybe neglecting, but I'm definitely, at least at the very minimum, pushing to the side for now, because
Right.
and I don't want to live in and have to live with the future Nick, who doesn't do the thing that needs to be done. Because I think that would be the essence of somebody who's irresponsible, so I'm teeter-tottering on the edge of that possibility right now. So so what I'm saying is I appreciate you giving me the opportunity, and wouldn't mind if you kind of pushed a little bit more. It's okay.
Push a little more.
Yeah,
like
you can push
the conversation, or
no, like just in general, you can push me a little bit more to be like, hey, like you're neglecting future Nick. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're neglecting to afford choices to future Nick that he's going to need.
Yes. Thank
You
you.
don't love your future self enough.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, man. This has been a blast. I really appreciate you coming on, and I can't wait till next time.